Once upon a time, there were people traveling from country to country, teaching, wandering Jews, teachers. These days, the global teachers use airlines, they use technology, they don't speak from the head, but they make CDs, they make movies. The global teacher of today is a cyberspace creature. But the story is the same. The message hasn't changed so much. We're talking with Frank Natale, one of the global teachers of our times, someone who has centers in Amsterdam, Berlin, Ibiza,
Austin, Texas, Helsinki,
truly global.
Australia, yeah.
Frank has been around as a teacher, as a student, which in a way is the same thing, for many years. We're here in Amsterdam. What do you do in Amsterdam?
Well, Amsterdam has been my home base for Europe for the last 10 years. And I spent these 10 years traveling around Europe, planting seeds basically. And I've reached a point now where I want to basically cultivate Great Goddess Studios, which is the creative core of our network. It's where we have our recording studio and produce our music. It's where I write books. It's where we design trainings and seminars. It's where we train people to go out and present the work in other countries. They come here to be trained, etc. And so my emphasis now, I'm at an age where I don't really want to go on the road that much anymore. And it's time to focus on things like books and creating music and trainings. And so the work is happening here in Amsterdam, in this building, and also in our temple. We're building a goddess temple on the island of Ibiza, up on top of a mountain. We have been for the last 5 years. But it finally is in a place where we can bring people there. Before it was just a small group of us that would go. But now it's finished to the point where we can begin to bring other people there and do trainings there.
So basically from a small house, commune, you grow into a teaching center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have had centers before in the United States and in Berlin and in Italy. Amsterdam was always my private, personal home. I really didn't work here a lot, strangely enough. I mean, I've lived here for 10 years, but I've not really worked here. And now I'm going to begin to work here more often, more regularly, become more visible here in Amsterdam. I like the city. I like working here. And so the work is going to be focused here and on Ibiza, Spain, with some travel, of course, for promotional reasons and for training reasons, opening up new territory in South Africa, for example, going back to England again. I haven't worked in England in years. And because the book is out in English, and the Transdance book is doing well. And so there are these kinds of things going on that are forcing me to really operate at a different level.
Mm-hmm. Because, you know, one of the things we've seen you go through is say, from the Osho type of dancing meditation training that you did, you went into the didgeridoo, into the more tribal stuff, and then the concept came up of trance dance. You became Professor Trance, Professor Trance.
London Press, yeah.
Yeah, this is what the press does to you. But the concept wasn't too bad, because your message there was that by your own energy you can reach states that some people think you can only reach by drugs or other means.
Well, I was doing a training on ecology, actually, and I was getting the lowest response I had ever gotten. And I realized that I was just frightening people with facts. They were just feeling impotent and terrified. And so what I did was I went back to shamanism. I had touched on shamanism about 10, 15 years ago, thought it was irrelevant, and just kind of went on doing other work. But I remembered that when I was involved in shamanism, that I had a deep experience of the power of the earth, the power of nature, of natural law, and that it was healthy to live within those laws. And so I began to move away from gurus, I began to move away from Eastern mysticism, I began to move away from motivational walking on hot coals, all this kind of stuff, basically returning to nature. And I found a lot of peace for myself there, much more than just to present ecological arguments. The people who were having a direct experience of nature, including myself, they were really feeling it. And so I began to look for a location and find one in, when I work in the United States, I work in Mexico, but it's a little too far to travel from here. So I began to look, and I found Ibiza for many reasons, because Ibiza has the techno cyber crowd that does
It's always been a bit of a strange place.
It's a wild place, and a lot of hippies that dropped out there in the 60s and so forth and so on. But we found a place up on top of a mountain that's totally removed from that. It takes you about 20 minutes to drive to the center of town. And we're totally in nature, off this cliff. We're literally building a place that hangs off a cliff overlooking Esvedra. Esvedra is this mythological location where the sirens called out to Ulysses to try and crash his boats. And the local Ibizancos still believe these myths and are terrified of the mountain and call the trees witches' trees. And there's only 6 of us that live on the mountain, and we're all considered to be a bit wild or a bit crazy, like the witches. But the work has really had a sense of coming home. I stopped worshiping masters. I stopped the whole business of humankind worshiping something that looks like themselves, something with a head and 2 arms and 2 legs, rather than worshiping the earth, worshiping the sun, worshiping the moon, worshiping the seasons, or at least celebrating them. And for example, the new year starts for us in February, not January. That's when spring is. It's obvious that that's when the new year begins. And pagans would celebrate the new year around springtime. Christmas was more a celebration of one's own birth from the stars.
Around the darkest night of the year.
Yeah, this kind of the return of the sun they were celebrating at Christmas time. And the sun was Jesus. That's where Christians got it from. They took from this and created Jesus. And so I've returned back to the archaic values, back to the original symbols, and tried to get away from a lot of the disciplines and tried to go straight to nature. Yeah.
So what you're saying is that ecology, as taught now in schools, like we talk chemistry and physics and so many this and millirem of radiation and you say forget about it. Make it an experience rather than a thought process.
Well, I did it as an intellectual process, and it was a powerful training, but no one came. They were terrified. It was the only seminar. I mean, I got more people to come to a rejection training than I could get to come to an ecology training. And it finally dawned on me that what was wrong was they had no direct experience of what nature was, that we have become so removed, many of us who live in cities, because I love cities also, have become so removed that we have lost touch with this natural magic. There is a natural magic to the earth and contained within nature, I mean, that is just unexplainable. And when you're in nature and you've trained yourself to see it, or allowed yourself to see it, it's everywhere. And we take people up on the mountain in Ibiza, and within 3 days, they're already in a trance state before we even do anything to them, just because they're up on a mountain where the wind is blowing constantly. It's constantly moving and changing. It isn't static. We have created very static environments, environments that we have total control over. For example, one year in Ibiza, Shirako came from North Africa, and well, I tell you, our schedule just ended. You know, you deal with the Shirako for a week, you know, and we were lying there sweating with fevers, and then the wind would come and half knock down the house, and you were real busy with this kind of thing. You didn't have time for your calendar, you see, and we're not used to this. Those of us that live in cities, we're more accustomed to having very controlled environments, and so there is not intervention from spirit that's really dramatic, that really forces you to respond. And so I feel the need to work more in nature, and my sense was I was having people doing vision quests, but they were doing them in seminar halls. We were doing full moon rituals in Berlin, for example, indoors. And, you know, there's a moon out there. And you take a guy on a vision quest and you put him up on top of a mountain and you say sit outside overnight. That's a lot different than having them sit in the dark in a room in a seminar house for a night, you see? Because you're exposed to the elements, your fears come up. It's kind of Jesus in the desert or Moses up on top of the mountain. These kinds of quests, these kinds of ways of searching for values that we don't even realize we have are very difficult to bring forth in what I would call unnatural controlled environments. Mm-hmm. Now there are other ways with the technology that we have to work that way too, but to do it in balance, to really expose people to both is what we're about now.
Yeah, let's go a little bit back in history, because you started out as what in your 20s and your 30s?
I was the founder or co-founder of a place called Phoenix House, which is one of the world's largest drug-free therapeutic communities, and I worked with former drug abusers, basically, people with antisocial problems, whether that be juvenile delinquency, prostitution, alcoholism, mostly petty crime, but some crime. And I did this for 13 or 15 years, and out of that I developed a series of trainings to help these people, because once you cure somebody or heal them, they have to return to our culture. And it was evident to me that they didn't perceive themselves as creators, so I invented or created a thing called the results course, which is very popular still to this day. Another course on self-esteem, another course on communication, another course on sexuality. These kinds of things, which were the areas in which most of the general public that I worked with were troubled. And of course I realized I had trouble in these areas also. And so I realized it wasn't just my re-entering former drug abusers, but it was the society in general that had doubts and fears in these areas. So we developed those courses, and that's how I started.
Is that related to what in America they call this 12-step program, which is a slightly spiritually oriented way to get over alcoholism?
12-step is AA, and I was not related to AA at all, Alcoholics Anonymous. It was more, I was involved with a man named Diederik, Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls, these kinds of people, Bucky Fuller. These were people who were involved in an organization in those days called Synanon, which was a very powerful organization in California. It still exists, I think, but I was there for years, and I was on their board of directors. I was the youngest guy on their board of directors, which is why I left. Everybody else was...
But this was end of 60s, 70s?
End of 60s, 70s.
Times where Esalen was founded?
Esalen was the only place that you could go to, and that's where I met all these people. And what was incredible in those days is that everybody was in one place. You could find them all in one place. You know, I remember Gabriel Roth and I were students. We were sitting...
dancing.
Yeah, we were dancing, but we were listening to guys like Bucky Fuller talk about geodesic domes and you know, whoever it was that was giving a lecture that day, or Fritz talking about, you know, Gestalt therapy. It was possible in those days.
But
and it was
like
very
Fritz
psychological.
was there. Just to make clear,
Yeah, he was
Esalen is a small, well, it's quite a large commune, retreat, center, conference center, really on the coast of Big Sur between Los Angeles and
South of San Francisco, kind of like Carmel.
It was started at the end of the 60s.
End of the 60s by a guy named Murphy. His father lent him the land, and it was Esalen Indians used to inhabit this land. It was sacred land.
And there was hot springs.
Hot springs, natural hot springs, and it was just the Mecca. It was the place where everybody went when they were looking for alternative answers or alternative healing. There was no such thing in those days. I mean, when I introduced things like meditation, for example, or encounter groups into therapy with former drug addicts, it was revolutionary in those days. Now, meditation is normal. No one even reacts to it. They think it's a great idea.
Yeah, but that's the funny thing.
In those days, there was a heavy reaction to it, you know.
It was like America reinventing meditation and training and all those things. Then went to the East, looked for teachers there like Osho, found them, brought them back sometimes, you know, made part of it, and now we see in the 90s the same energy but far more tribal, far more going back to shamanistic earth, you know, less technology in a way.
Yeah, going back to the origins of these things. I mean, if you see Jesus Christ crucified on the cross and you understand the archaic symbolism of that, the cross is a symbol of a significant spiritual passage, and the man Jesus is the man dying to his Christ consciousness. It's ego dying to Christ consciousness. Now that's a whole different meaning than some guy dying on the cross for our sins, you see, which is the popular interpretation. And so if you look at the Star of David, the six-pointed star, it really is a pyramid, an upright pyramid, which was the feminine symbol, and an inverted pyramid, which was the masculine symbol, because the man looks up but is precariously balanced on the earth, whereas the woman is very grounded to the earth. And you took these two pyramids and put them over each other, and you got a six-pointed star, which later became the Star of David. But you see, these are all later interpretations, and so what we have done
Yeah, but if you
is
would
gone
look
back
in
to
the
the
Bible,
original one.
yeah, but if you would look in the Bible, I mean, the story of Jesus going in the desert for 40 days,
Yeah.
it's a classic vision
Yes,
quest.
exactly.
And what is described there,
Yeah,
he's
exactly.
meeting with the devil,
Devils and
in him or out him, whatever.
serpents, yeah, exactly.
It's the same stories as you find
Yes.
in the Indian books,
Yes.
and as the people that you now guide have.
Well, what happened with shamanism in the East was that it was allowed to evolve. You see, here in the West, especially here in Europe, all the way on down to the Alps and the Pyrenees, you had the Ice Age, first of all. And you had a very strong male-dominating kind of culture in order to survive. But you also had witch hunts, you had the Inquisition, you had these kinds of things which really took shamanism and destroyed it. For example, the only shamanic tribe left in Europe are the Samis in northern Scandinavia. They're the only tribe that still moves freely over borders and is allowed to do so. All the rest have been wiped out. Whereas if you go down to South America, you see many, many tribes still being wiped out, by the way, but at least they still exist, they still are alive. So,
would you see this is an age-old struggle between the status quo of spirituality and the self-experienced spirituality? Because that is, you know, all through the ages you had Inquisition was basically saying, this is the dogma, this is what we have to tell you, you have to believe it, versus the Cathars who were wiped out, and the witches and so on, who said, hey, wait a moment, this is our own experience. So you have an opposition of these two forces.
spirituality is something you have to live, which is what we now teach. Religion is something one can do on weekends. You can do it on weekends, but you can't be spiritual on weekends. You have to be spiritual daily. You have to think spiritually. You have to change your point of view about things. You have to start eating differently, for example, living differently. Why do I want to write another book even? What's the point of this? Is it all about money, or is there really something to say? You see, these kinds of values start to come up after a while, and as you get older, especially, you get to be my age, you start to really think about what's the point of all of this. I'd be better off taking a holiday with my lover and her kids, you know, than writing another book. What's the real reason for this? Or is there really something to say? And it forces you to go for that integrity.
Well, you looked into that, but what is your real reason to do it?
Well,
is it your
obviously I earn my living this way, but I also love it. I enjoy it. I'm a bit of a nut, as you well know, and I need to stay in the work. I need the work. I need to stay grounded. I need to stay in touch with nature. And if I don't stay in touch with it, I start to drift off, and I start to get
Are you
involved.
saying this is just an elaborate trick to do the work yourself?
Well, in the early days, I mean, anybody that says that they come to this work because they were wanted to help others and save the world really needs to take a closer look. Because all of us went into this work initially because we needed it
Oh
ourselves.
yeah. My father didn't recognize me, so
Yeah.
now I have to be a preacher man.
Well, I have to do something to connect with, to heal our own craziness, our own neurosis. When you have gone past that point, which I have, you become a professional at it. You're professional at doing this. It no longer is as subjective as it once was. There still is some subjective stuff going on that you're still healing yourself, but you're professional. You're objective, and you're training people and leading trainings and designing them and writing books, and it's a different level of the work, and you're still in the work. You still are discovering things. That's the other thing about this work, is that it's endless. The internal landscape is endless. It's infinite, and so there's always more, and there's always more territory to open. Also, if we're going to South Africa and places like this, but I'm not really interested in doing that anymore. I'm training younger people now. My emphasis for the next 2 years is to train people in what I know, and they're coming from all over. They're coming from Australia, South Africa, England, Germany, Italy. They're coming here to be trained.
When you say younger people, I have a feeling that there is a generation between 30 and 40 that are not so much interested. They're called the lost generation.
Yeah.
And that below that,
Yeah.
the 20,
That's it.
20
Late
they
20s.
are really into it again.
Late 20s, 30s, they're really into it. They really are getting out of school, studying medicine, for example, but can't get a job as a doctor, you know. And they're saying, why? What is this all about? They see their fathers and their mothers diseased with all kinds of diseases at old age and eating wrong, and they're questioning. And they're coming in great numbers. And a lot of the older people are saying, my God, who are all these young people around you, Frank? And I keep laughing. I keep saying, well, I'm not doing it on purpose. They're coming. There is another whole generation.
That's a thing that happened to Tim Leary, for instance. He had very young friends and associates and whatever, and then he had his old cronies, you know, the beat generation.
You have your colleagues, you have your own peers that you bounce stuff off, but your students and the people you're training for the most part are young. Now, something is changing. You know, as you obviously know, the post-war baby boom is about to mature. And the majority of the population, at least in the Western world, for the first time in a very short time, is going to be 40, 50 and over. And it's going to be interesting to see what we do, because we're the ones that made the mess, you know. And now that we're the elders, it's going to be interesting to see what we clean up, because we're the ones that destroyed the environment. We did it out of ignorance. You know, it was 25 years ago. We thought we could throw everything in the ocean. It would just be taken care of. Well, now we know that that's not true anymore, but it's our mess. And if we're in charge, and if we have the power, and if we control the vote, and most of us now are successful, I'm not a 60s kid anymore. My hair's still a little long, and my values probably are deeply rooted in the 60s, the whole hippie love generation. But I do it in a more cyberpunk way. I do it with technology, as you said. I do it with CDs, I do it with movies. And it's more of a business attitude about it, because that's the new power. The first power was the church, the second power was government, and now the new power is corporations. You can tell by the buildings. The tallest buildings always tell you who's got the power.
Yeah, but the corporations also falling apart, or at least going...
Yeah, they're falling apart, but I mean, that's part of the process. I think they need to... it's called correction, unfortunately, in the stock market recently, but I mean, it's like these things... there's always destruction before creation. Mm-hmm. There's always resurrection after death, but you have to die first, you see. And how to die, or how to allow things that aren't valuable to die, and how to preserve what is valuable. For example, we don't only live to be 70 or 100 years. I mean, so we don't remember. The kids that are born today, they're born into an environment with a polluted river that you don't swim in. They accept that. I don't accept that because I remember swimming in that river. But I'll be dead in another 30, 40 years, you see. And so the lifespan of a human being already accounts for the fact that we can easily forget what was before, including this thing called nature. And I'm not certain that that's wise. And that's why I've gone back to nature. My teaching is about trance dancing. There's rituals that I studied when I went into the Amazon and North American Indians and so forth to try and pull out the basic fundamentals of what spirituality was. People in the West, they want to read a book. You know it as well as I do. They want to read a book, 100 pages. They want to be able to read it in one night and give it to a friend. They
want a Harvard synopsis in 2 pages.
They
I've read it.
Enlightened in a weekend. and they're not old enough to be enlightened, no less even in a weekend. But I mean, it's for me, it's about integrity now, and it's about training people, and it's about going back to what I think is really valuable and worth preserving.
Preserving. The funny thing that I see in the world is that many people think the year 2000, there's a negativity, yes? We have to save the world.
Yeah.
Very few people come with an optimistic attitude and say, hey, the world has taken care of itself for a long time, it will take care of it. I found a rather negative thing. When we talk environment, we talk about defending the environment. It's like all a negative attitude. You could say, hey, the environment takes care of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah? And then I mean, there's as many theories about the environment as not, and you know, the polar things is slimming, is becoming bigger or smaller, whatever. There's theories a lot, but where is the positive attitude?
Well, the positive attitude is basically that whether we evolve into a species that lives within nature or without nature, what are our values going to be? How are we going to live? In other words, the reason I chose the goddess cultures and called Great Goddess Studios is that most people don't know that there were cultures that lived in Eastern Europe around the Mediterranean for which we have physical evidence of 40,000 years, probably longer, who lived in peace, partnership, and cooperation. No weapons have been found, that there were literally people who lived this way. And they were mostly agrarian cultures. They were mostly cultures that were attached to the topsoil in some way.
And they had a more of a female orientation.
Yes, well, their values were what we now would call female values, but in those days, both men and women had the same values. They worshipped Mother Earth. They worshipped one deity.
No, but isn't this like in America? You have this change in culture, the hunter society versus the settler society.
Yeah.
If you have a hunter society, it's quite normal that there is more esteem for the macho, for the guy that goes out, the defender of the household.
Yeah, but you go to an Indian culture in South America, and the men are very macho, but they have a deep respect for the feminine spirit. The elders, up until 100 years ago, the tribal clans were mostly women, and they decided if the men went to war or not. It was the women who decided, not the men, because the women were more patient and the guys got to go to war less. A lot of people think men like to go kill themselves. They don't. We really don't. We really like it when the women say, don't go.
Give us a good excuse.
And they're still very macho, these guys, especially down in South America. It's just part of their culture, but they have different values. They value that mango tree and don't destroy that mango tree. And they use teaching plants a lot. They use a lot of marijuana. They use psilocybin to what they say civilize the male energy, basically. And so in some cultures you have women who have cultivated Santa Maria, or what we would call marijuana, and they create rituals and they teach young boys at coming of age, which we would, in our culture, at that passage around 13 years of age, we would call puberty. They teach them to smoke this marijuana. Now I've been smoking marijuana myself since I was 15. And I know what it does to me. It does calm my ego down. It does relax my male, let's go get them today. It does allow me to sit back, be a bit more understanding, a bit more acceptance. It does dissolve boundaries. See,
but you
I
don't
guess
call them
Terrence
drugs.
did the most work. No, I don't call them drugs because I don't
You call them
use...
teaching plants.
Well, because I don't use unnatural substances. I don't even take ecstasy or anything that's unnatural. I only use mushrooms on occasion for ritual reasons, marijuana sometimes recreationally, but Santa Maria also in spiritual ritual. And they're natural plants. They come
you call
from
them
nature.
teaching plants.
Well, they teach because they open you to, different channels of information. Santa Maria is incredibly powerful when one is conceptualizing, when one can just sit around with a bunch of peers and just talk about the universe and the nature of the universe or ecology. And then you go to your book. Then you go write stuff down later. But to open the head and to dissolve boundaries, you see, in our culture, we're all about coffee, we're all about amphetamine, we're all about
beer,
speed, alcohol, which define boundaries and limit one's experience of who they are. And if you take a substance in our culture, teaching plant or drug even, that dissolves boundaries, that allows you to escape your skin-encapsulated mentality and become more than just inside your body, then you're a weirdo. That's strange. That's illegal. So basically our culture says what states of consciousness are legal and what states of consciousness are illegal. And they have taken out a whole very important part here in the West, which still exists in tribal cultures. And that is that their communication is far more sophisticated than ours. They see the whole picture. They don't just see the physical world. They see the value in that experience. They see the spiritual symbolism of why that event occurred. They don't just see the physical event. And we have had that other point of view removed, and we just see the physical event.
And we have locked off. We have separated ourselves from all the other experience. But
to the point where we say we're going to save the world, save the planet. The planet doesn't need saving. The planet was here before us.
But is this really
She'll
true,
be here
Frank?
long after us. We'll be dead.
We will be dead.
Our species, maybe.
Yeah, but is it true that people don't feel the outer layers? I mean, we have a stock market and they say, oh, it is because of, I don't know, Hong Kong going down, whatever. I have a feeling that a lot of things happen still in town, the riots, whatever, because the stars are there in a certain situation, or there's just an energy going, and we do react to it. Yes. We just don't acknowledge it.
Yeah. No, we don't realize it. We're not in touch with it. For example, when I go to the place in Ibiza, when I go to the place in Spain, I'm up on top of a mountain. Well, I'm in awe of the sunrise and the sunset, and I see the stars moving and the sun, and you move differently, you think differently. You respond to your day in a different way when you're part of nature. In a city, we have created such an illusion that we've allowed ourselves to remove ourselves from nature, you see? And what we really are is just another animal running around on the topsoil, you know? We've got lots of creatures running around on the topsoil.
Which is a very small part of the earth anyway.
Humans are just another animal running around on the topsoil. And if we destroy the topsoil, we get destroyed. Our species will disappear, not Earth. This is how removed we've become. We've become so removed that we're saving the planet. No, don't save the planet. Save the human race. The planet's fine. She was fine before we arrived, and she'll be fine long after we're gone. You know, we still sit around talking about the sun rising and the sunset. The sun is not rising and setting. We're turning. The sun just sits there. And we have a lot of points of view which are very egotistical and not based in being part of something greater or larger, which is what spirituality is.
But so, would you call it God? Or?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't think of it as God. I think of it as something far more intelligent than that, far greater than that, because God for me is masculine in my culture, you know.
But it's a cultural issue. But this is the God.
Yeah, the God.
The God.
Scientifically, I would even call it present time. It's when you go out of this membrane, when you leave this three-dimensional time, space, cause and effect, Cartesian thought, everything has a reason, analyze everything, nothing ever happens without a reason. You pop out of that, where do you go? You go into a dream state. What's a dream state? A dream state is present time. We go there every night when we go to sleep, but if we do it during the day when we're awake with some plant, it's illegal, you see. And so more people need to go in. Trance dancing is popular because you can access that state of consciousness lucidly. You see, people know how valuable dreams are. That's why Freud was interested this way. Everybody's interested in them. But you're unconscious most of the time because you're doing it when you sleep, and the average person dreams about 300 times a night, which in shamanic terms would mean that they take a journey, 300 journeys a night, journeys for power a night, of which they remember maybe the pieces of one. When you trance dance, when you trance dance or do other shamanic rituals, you are in that dream state, but you're lucid, you're conscious, which means you can interact with your dreams. You can even determine their outcome based on how you respond to the symbols that you see and what you say and what you do. So this is a very high level of spiritual learning, much more powerful than any psychology. If you can get people to just relax and to go in there and to accept what they're seeing is true. I see people have all kinds of incredible experiences. They come out of the experience and we have them integrate it and share it afterwards, and they go right into denial. Well, I don't know if that happened. And I'll have to say, well, did it happen? Did you see that? Yes, I saw that. Was it real? Yes, it was real. But now I don't know. Was it real then? Yes, it was. Such denial of this other state.
But that's what science and schools have taught them. They said, hey, don't
exactly.
believe that.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the church tries to preserve part of that.
Well, the church, I think religion was well-meaning in the beginning. I think religion meant well. I think their purpose was to try and put this all into terms that people could begin to understand, and therefore integrate and use in their lives. I don't think that they were it was a bad intention. What's happened, though, is it's become very distorted. It's become
stiffed up
subject.
because of social.
Well, yeah, there's
an organization.
Money involved. It's a corporation, and it's subject to the interpretations of the Pope at this point. This is a human being. This is a man who's got his own ideas and his own agendas, and so you get thousands of years of popes, and things change. You know, the Bible wasn't written even until 50 years after Christ supposedly died. And then there's a whole group of people that says he never even died, that he went off and got married, and Mary Magdalene, you know, you got all kinds of stories here about religion. But if you get away from that and you go back to the man was in the scene, Jesus, and he was very close to nature. And he was a
He seemed to have been pretty okay.
Hands-on physical healer, this guy. This guy was a heavy-duty healer, and it was about the physical body, and the Essenes lived always in nature. They always lived near water. And so if you understand that he always said you have to go through the mother to go to the father, then you understand what he's saying. But religion now is saying go directly to the father. Forget about the mother. Just ignore the earth.
A paternalistic idea.
Go to the light. Forget about the earth. You know, and that's exactly what everybody's doing. They're trying to get to the light without the earth. And who knows? You know, you get to a point in this work where you say, well, maybe that's the way it's supposed to go. Maybe there is some magnet up here, some God or whatever, some voice, some consciousness that's attracting us, you know, that's pulling us in this direction, and this is the way we have to go. Who knows?
Now, talking about that, we have regular science, you know, the people that study drug abuse and stuff like that. And there's people like you, and it feels more like you're the mother lode of awareness. You have delved into your experience and whatever. But then there is this society of professors and scientists, and they do scientific research on drug abuse and stuff like that. And the two worlds don't seem to meet, really. You have the guys like Terence and Robert Sheldrake, and their books are burned, and they're considered wackos.
Well, they're put in jail. We're persecuted.
Persecuted?
I was arrested for working with teaching plants and rituals. I was arrested and had to stop. And you know, all of them have been stopped. If you talk about it and write books about it, it's okay. But if you actually want to practice it, you want to really do the research, you want to really get in there and do the work, they'll come and arrest you. And what's incredible about the teaching plant rituals is that I have had the best responses of all the trainings, and I've designed 20 trainings in the last 40 years, and they're all pretty good. I get the most powerful responses from people because it happens to them later. It happens to them, they come here for a weekend, they do the work, and then they go back to their lives, and it takes about 2 weeks for it to integrate, for them to realize what happened. Because, like I said, they're in a dream state. And then they write these most incredible testimonies from these teaching plant rituals. But I was stopped. The government stopped me. Not here, but in other countries. I can't work anywhere else. And even here, I have to be careful. I have to be respectful of the laws here, and I am. But I mean,
well, it seems there's two kinds of groups of people within the law, within the structure. There's one group that says, hey, let's be careful about the medical risks, and up to a point that's
some truth.
There's some truth. We don't want people jumping off buildings.
No.
And there is this whole group, war on drugs, the legal guys, the police that find their self-assurance, that find their self-worth in persecuting others. They build a whole system. It's called the war on drugs. It fills jails.
Well, that war has been led by the country that I'm a citizen of. I haven't been there in a long time, but I mean, the United States is really the one that pushed that through, and I've watched that whole evolution, because my grandmother used to smoke marijuana. She used to call it strong tobacco. She used to smoke it at night before she went to sleep, you know. But you see then later, you hear all these stories about why it became illegal, and hemp now is having a comeback, and you hear about DuPont and Hearst and the kind of industrial conspiracy that went on, and it all seems to make a lot of sense. And it makes no sense why the United States is still, to this day, to this taping, is still against this absolutely harmless plant. There's no physical evidence. Every research, every penny they've spent a fortune trying to find something
to prove
wrong,
it's bad.
And they always come up with something better that's good, so they have to bury the study. Bury the study because it talks too positively. And so there is a reason, and I think given the way that our world works, it's got to be about money. There's something here about money.
Or is it about that basic father-mother energy that we're talking about? The idea that there has to be a class of people that suppresses others, that there is a female energy and a male energy, and it has to be, and whatever they choose, whether it's drugs or alcohol. I mean, there have been times that they choose alcohol as a repressant, and there have been times that they choose the Bible or whatever religion to suppress people. It seems there's always a need for some...
To contain people, to control them.
Polarity.
Well, the status quo, the people in power always want to control the rest of the masses. That's where they get their power from. That's why they're powerful. You start giving people things like Santa Maria, psilocybin, mushrooms. For example, our ancestors used to do regular rituals to open up their minds, where they would travel the inner landscape, where they would leave the mundane reality to explore other possibilities. As McKenna says, I think, and I agree with him, I think this was essential to our evolution. And when we stopped that about 50, 60 years ago, when we started saying, no, you can't do that anymore, I really think our evolution stopped. And we've seen the results of it. We're looking around and we see the mess. It's incredible.
But it's not true, because the evolution hasn't started. Many, many millions of people are still on the path. Don't you? I mean, I see that very positive.
I think even more so they're on the path, but it's more of a in order to deal with the status quo, they're going to have to fight, and they're not the fighting type. The whole idea of smoking marijuana, I mean, how many people do you know that smoke marijuana who are violent? I don't know any. How many people you know that drink alcohol that are violent? I know a lot, okay? So it's like, why? It's obvious to everybody. You don't have to be a scientist to figure this out. You just have to look out. So why is it allowed to go on? Why isn't it stopped? Why isn't somebody saying, you know, enough of this? And I think, by the way, it's coming. I think the time is coming. You're seeing more and more people change their point of view about this. It's education. People are uneducated. They've been propagandized. Reefer madness, all of this craziness, you know. And it's like when I go down for, like it's October 31st in a couple of days, when I go down to Mexico and I celebrate the Day of the Dead, and we go into the cemeteries and we play guitars, and there's kids running around, skeletons hanging from trees, and people are taking mushrooms. There's no anger here. There's nothing but joy, and people singing songs and dancing and talking to their ancestors and worshiping their ancestors. This is not a hostile environment at all. It's a very peaceful, very magical environment. To take a cemetery and to turn it into a picnic ground, for example, that's what it becomes in the daytime. It's different than at night because the kids are running around playing games and stuff. It's like you're on a picnic, but then you realize, wait a second, I'm in the cemetery. It's a little strange here. Strange for us, but I mean, yeah, for us, Halloween is a commercial opportunity to sell lots of masks and games and noisemakers and things like this. So we have made everything recreational. Dancing is now recreational, it once was sacred. Sex is now recreational, it once was sacred. Alcohol. Teaching plants, all of these kinds of mind-altering substances were once sacred, they're now recreational. Hunting is now recreational. Killing is recreational in our culture. And so we really have to stop at some point and say, wait a second, is recreation all that much fun? You know, is it really that valuable? Maybe there's something else that isn't about ha 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 all the time that's really valuable, that maybe we should begin to respect these things too in our culture. The Santo Daime people, the ayahuasca people, I came into contact with them about 3 years ago and down in Brazil and brought them here and we toured. They have a very, very deep concept of spirituality. Very serious about it when it requires that and needs that. And I think there are times when people need to be not serious, heavy, depressed, but thoughtful. Thoughtful about what it is they're doing with their lives. And if you stop twice a month, as they do, or even once a month, and you just stop and you take a look at your life and you go beyond your limitations, beyond your boundaries, and you pull in new ideas.
No, but at the same time, Frank, the rituals we're talking about, ayahuasca rituals, out the Santo Daime, are somewhat paternalistically organized. They're controlled,
organized, very controlled.
And there is a God ID that takes care of you, and you're there in His care, and you have to follow that. It's different from other ayahuasca rituals I've seen, where it's more like a loose flow and a more maternal, feminine energy.
Well, I think that the Santo Daime people realized, as many Indians realized, Indians meaning South American Indians, realized a long time ago that if they linked Christianity with their shamanic values and threw them all in one pot, they wouldn't be killed.
Yeah,
that's what they did. That's what they did to survive.
These are called slave religions.
But when I've been down in the Amazon and I'm talking to a guy, and I think he's talking about Blessed Mother Mary, the Virgin, he's not. He's talking about the Queen of the Forest, and he has a whole different view. And if I'm talking about Jesus Christ, and he's talking about Jurmeda, who is their form of Jesus, it's more like an eagle about the size of a 747. That's what he sees, you see. He doesn't see a guy hanging on a cross. He sees an eagle about as big as a 747 flying through the sky. So they're Christians, but very different kinds of Christians. And the Santo Daime people are very militaristic, but if you ever go to any spiritual culture where they are taking plants of that strength, where one really does leave the mundane, you have to organize them, or they would do nothing. They would just sit around and gaze all day. So in order to get the food...
Oh, no, I agree. The structure of the ritual is very well thought out.
Very thought out.
Yes, very effective way
with
minimal risks.
Yeah, I didn't realize how structured it was till
I got with the clothes and everything.
Till I got to know them and I began to travel with them. Now, I never became a member of their clan. I never wore one of their stars, but I have a deep respect for them, these people. And I didn't want to go any further with them. I had enough. I had my sense. I went looking for something and I found it. I was looking for, as I said, connections, spiritual connections to the earth. And these people were very connected to the earth in their spirituality. They had this Christian stuff going on, but they also had this very kind of Mother Earth feeling to them in the way in which they related to the earth and to the female energy and to their way of life. There was a balance that we've lost in our culture. And that's what my work is about now. It's about bringing that balance back.
Yeah, and coming back to reality, because part of the thing is that to tell the people that you do give things in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. You have a place at the Haarlemmer Straat 116. We'll put the phone numbers there. You have retreats in Ibiza. In fact, Frank Natale is accessible, and what you hear here, you can hear from him live too. Okay. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Pleasure.